it's not just about connecting to this time together, this live stream, but learning how to connect to each other and saying hi to each other, feeling like you're building a sense of community. So just a reminder of how important that is given our context, and particularly given this is probably going to be an extended push now. The epidemiologist I listen to periodically says, come on, we get one big push here to get us through this experience of distributing this vaccine more widely so that we can turn the corner on this pandemic. I'm hopeful, but we all have to buckle down and keep going. So just hang in there, hang in there. The other thing I wanted to note today, for those of you who are logging in early, is that I'm wearing my butterfly shirt, which I only wear strategically. And I'm wearing it today because I want to spend some time with you thinking about how can Christianity transcend itself? How can our connection to Christianity and our sense of our religious place in the world literally rise above itself? In a sense, take on its butterfly wings and feel the warmth of a new day and move into new territory. I think, given what we're going to talk about today, resurrection, if you will, if you're somebody in the Christian tradition, this sort of applying resurrection to religion itself. How does religion and the religious experience and the Christian experience find its way beyond its own construct into the vibrancy of life itself? In a sense, I want to think about the way in which Jesus used this term when he was questioned about his disciples' behavior on the Sabbath. He said, don't forget, humankind wasn't made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for humankind, right? That there is this capacity in the teachings of Jesus that part of the beauty of what he brought was this capacity to see that religion is not something that constrains us, but religion is a partner with us inside the evolving context in which we find ourselves. It's part of the human experience. And so that's what I want to explore today. That's the shirt. That's the shirt and the weight loss that's required to wear the shirt. All right. So that's where we're at. Good to see everybody this morning. I'm glad you're on board. So let me set up a little bit of what I think I want the conversation to look like today. And then I want to do a little bit of a centering piece around the music that Martin picked for today, Gather Us In, that great song by Marty Haugen, and use that as our sort of centering piece, how important that is. And then spend some time reflecting on the way in which religion has capacity to transcend itself, and then offer some tools to think about how that might work for you. So that's where we're going today. I think, like many of us, I was gloating a bit, thinking, oh my gosh, the GOP is having a come to Jesus moment, right? On the last Wednesday, on the 6th, when we saw kind of the like the violent edge of a party that had been, in a sense, reinforcing the rhetoric around the deep suspicion of the state, and even the deep suspicion around a democratic process of selecting a new leader for our country. And we saw the absolute riotous behavior on the part of many white Americans who not only supported the previous administration and that president that we're about ready to move beyond, but then felt it was their obligation to disrupt or possibly even overthrow the process of affirming the next president of the United States of America, democratically, elected by what was, and I think what was in a sense lost by their capacity to disrupt the system. One of, I think in the last 100 years, one of the most robust democratic processes to select a new president, right? The turnout levels around the country were higher than they've been in over 100 years. And that despite the pandemic that was weighing on so many of us, that despite all of the suspicions around who could vote and how you could vote and whether that was a legitimate vote, all of that was going on. To literally watch Georgians show up in such numbers, I think even Minnesota, 80% of the Minnesotan population voted. I mean, these are incredible numbers. So what we witnessed, during this election cycle was a robust democracy. We really did. And no matter where you fell on how it turned out, that's what we saw. A robust democracy that I think in some ways is driven by an awakening in the American soul of that there are so many things that we need to address together, right? From climate to race, to equity, to the economy, to education, to the state of politics as we know it. I mean, there's just so many issues on the table that people felt like, I want to have my voice. And isn't that great? I mean, that's what's so beautiful about democracy is that in its best construct, it allows everyone to have a voice in our collective conversation. And as the nation it becomes more and more diverse, that means more and more diverse voices come to the table to do that. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what happened. And then back to my statement, we watch this sort of come to Jesus moment in the GOP, thinking, wow, they're really having to question kind of the vibrancy and the shape and the heart of the soul of that party. And then what happens? And I don't know about you, but I begin to realize that, and many commentators noted this, that God was a huge part of that moment, if you want to call it an insurrection, or you want to call it white domestic terror, whatever you want to call it. God was a big player in that moment. That there were people who were exhorting to violence, who were on their knees in prayer prior. There was the symbol of the Christian cross everywhere. There were people literally playing Christian music while they were chanting for the demise of the vice president. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's not just the GOP is having a come to Jesus moment. Christianity, and if you're a Christian or someone in this tradition, we too had to wake up to this fact that, my goodness, what in the world is going on with our cherished and beloved religion that's in a sense being utilized by people who are advocating for the overthrow of a democratic process. And I have to admit, I don't know what you've been going through, but I'm not sure I'm able to make sense of that yet. And yet that's what I think we need to pay attention to it enough that we boil down our own particular commitments to our faith or our spirituality or our Christian tradition in a way that allows us to both kind of frame what that was all about, which I hope to do a little bit of today, and also to transcend what that was about and say, well, what, is my Christianity, is it capable of being used to those ends? And if so, why? And is there something about the way in which I hold my Christianity that would allow me to loosen the grip of that capacity of this religion on my own life's journey and my own way of integrating Christianity into my daily life? Okay, so that's what we're up to today. I know it's complex. I know we're in a new setting because my office is being redone, and I didn't want to take a break from being at home. So, and I'm growing a beard. I mean, there's just a lot of things changing, right, for you. So hang in there. Hang in there. So let's get started with what I think is a helpful ending place. And that is, I want to use the lyrics of the song Gather Us In, because that song, written by Marty Haugen, is used at the ingathering around this collective table that we share. So for those of you in the Christian tradition, there's this moment when everyone is invited to this open table. And it's a metaphor for the way in which the sense of God's life-giving grace is shared with the community. And Marty Haugen wrote a piece called Gather Us In that is often used in connection to this ritual of inviting people to open table. And Martin today plays that music. If you've listened to it before we started, that's great, or listen to it after we're done talking. But I want to use the lyrics of that song, just some of them, to kind of ground ourselves in what is the open capacity of Christianity to invite all into the experience or the gift of life. Not just, to be at a Lutheran table in a Lutheran church or a Presbyterian table in a Presbyterian church, but the language within Christianity is the beginnings of an opening language that invites all into this sort of family together. So just take a moment, take a couple of deep breaths, and let's use these lyrics to kind of center ourselves this morning as we try to wrestle with how Christianity plays inside of our context and our time, and to make sure that we can hold it in a way that allows it to find its best self inside of the American experience or the global experience that we're sharing. All right? So just take a couple deep breaths and kind of settle down for the moment. And then let these words wash over you today. Marty Haugen begins his song with, "Here in this place, a new light is streaming. Now is the darkness vanished away. See in this space our fears and our dreamings brought here to you in the light of this new day. So gather us in, the lost, the forsaken. Gather us in, the blind and the lame. For we are the young, our lives still a mystery. We are the old who yearn for your face. So gather us in, the rich and the haughty. Gather us in, the proud and the strong. Gather us in, all peoples together. Fire of love in our flesh and our bones. Fire of love in our flesh and our bones. Here in this place, a new light is streaming." Aren't those beautiful lyrics? Beautiful lyrics for a day like this. All right, so now that we're kind of calmed down, in the mode a bit, and I got my globe and my Rodin's thinker, let's think about how Christianity fits into the world. That's what this little thing's about. Let's think about the way Christianity fits into the world, given the context of what happened as white people had a particular piety, right, that allowed them to fully integrate their perspectives on Christianity and the place of Jesus and the role of religion and their almost urgent need to disrupt a democratic process. I want to start by being a little bit critical about Christianity, and not critical as negative critical, but just thinking critically about it. Because the one thing that helps me understand how that can happen is, in reality, as far as I know anyway, there is no real religion that is built to support the kind of robust democratic uh, collective that we long to see established in our country. That's not where religions come from. I think they just aren't designed to reinforce the kind of coming together of diverse numbers and expressions of humanity in the collective decision-making process about how we'll construct our life together. That's just not where they were. That's not their roots, right? And so subsequently, inside of Christianity, there is not the kind of language that you need, oftentimes, to reinforce or support or to give your sense of, yeah, this is the right thing to be doing about the way in which we move through and into and hope for this democratic process that we're a part of. So what are the roots of Christianity and even the Hebrew tradition? Well, it's not that hard to figure it out, right? Both of those traditions are a condemnation and then a call to either overthrow or a longing for the destruction of those who hold power. Those who hold power. And of course, it was birthed out of in a sense, a critical assessment of those who held power, that they were holding it in a way that oppressed too many people. So look at Egypt, right? The core story of the Hebrew people. Egypt was grand, right? It had these grand construction projects. It was great, but inside of that system were these folks who were enslaved by that system, who saw it as a pure evil, and then all of the language around that in the psalmists, in the prophetic voices, in the narrative of the Hebrew people, all of those stories are stories that paint that system as being a both broken system, in a sense, like a satanic system, right? They saw the evils in that system, and the whole goal of the Hebrew trajectory is to break free from that system, and in some ways to they never really attacked it, but to sever themselves from that system. That paradigm and all of the language around it is at the heart of much of the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. Christianity had the same challenge with the Roman Empire, right? So the Roman Empire was seen, and then the way in which Rome co-opted religion at the time, that was seen as, again, the rule and the rulers were all seen in a negative context. And so the whole point of Christianity was to break from that system. And so that system was always looked at negatively. So in some ways, it makes perfect sense that as people commit to these narratives that hold our faith, the language inside of those narratives is language of confrontation, language of projecting into the space of those who hold power negativity. And so to me, there is a piety that's going to be born if you call yourself a Christian, but don't place those stories within their context, that you'll leverage that language quickly to assess whoever's in power, right? And so you see the kind of internal energy available for Christians to use the texts and, in a sense, to bring them into our context, but realizing that the context has changed, right? Our collective longing is not to support an oppressive political system, but to continue to build a more robust democracy. And so we have a completely different context, and yet we're using religious language from a different context and applying it today because so many people are so committed to that religious language. And I guess that's the one reflection I've had this week is that I, I don't think what they're doing is right, but I understand those who think they're completely committed to their religious paradigm are looking at their scriptures and their texts that they hold so sacred, and they can find justification for behaviors against the state that are there, because that's the birthing ground of not only Christianity and the Hebrew faith, but of other religions as well, right? So that's a problem. That's a problem. We need, in a sense, we need a religion that fits our context. We need a religion that fits our context. And how do we find our way into that? So that there's an ability to see, well, yeah, that was the language in that in our tradition, but it was language that was applied to a different context at a different time, at a different place. We've moved a long way from that. How do we allow our spirituality, our Christianity to move with us? All right. So that's reflection number one. What is the issue? Or at least one way of framing the issue that we saw on full display on the 6th, and maybe we're going to continue to see it. Well, I think we are going to continue to see it. So where do we go from here? And how do we move beyond a kind of piety that's rigidly connected to texts that are birthed in a different context and move into new frontier? Okay, hopefully you're on board for that. So let's just spend a minute talking about what's possible here. There's a lot to unpack about this, but and I could spend a couple hours just having a conversation with you about it. But I think one of the things to think about is, let's go back to that original comment I made, that in addition to all of the kind of religious energy that's inside Christianity, the Jesus movement, that early movement, clearly saw that, I think the best way to describe this is that kind of a living, dynamic spirit, a living God, the spirit of God is actually connected to our life experience, and that when it becomes disconnected from the present life experience, then it becomes a negative force in society. And that's what Jesus was confronting. Today, when we have the 11 o'clock service down in the parking lot, the text for today is John's Gospel. And John reflects on the calling of Nathanael. And Nathanael decides to follow Jesus. But as he's starting to make that decision, Jesus tells him, I saw you under the fig tree, and you're an amazing person under the fig tree, but I'm going to show you things you can't even imagine. And what we'll talk about at the 11 o'clock service is the fig tree is a metaphor for the nation of Israel, or the spirit of Israel, that Nathanael lived within the construct of his religious experience as a Jew, living in the deep and abiding wonder of his own religious tradition. And that's awesome, but that's not where it ends. That's only a beginning place as far as Jesus is concerned. And he says, Nathanael, I'm going to show you the way in which God functions like a conversation between all that is in heaven and all that is on earth. And that's the dynamism that I think is at the heart as well of Christianity, is this invitation to see this Christian journey linked to the dynamism of the human experience. Just like Jesus would say, look, humankind wasn't meant for the Sabbath. I mean, we're not designed to do Sabbath. Sabbath is designed for humankind, so that the spiritual life is always birthed out of this human experience that you're having. So that as a culture shifts from a relationship to something like Rome or Egypt to the dynamism of a potentially robust democracy, that's the conversation that should be going on in a healthy way with your spirituality, with your religious tradition, and not trying to apply an old context and the language that reinforced the spiritual tradition within that context to a different time and place. That's inappropriate. That is a negative thing to do. That's why we got out of the business of missionary work, right? We were taking our Christian, oftentimes white, male dominated religion and trying to apply it to other cultures around the world. It was a horrible idea, but we did it. It was a horrible idea to take native peoples and destroy their families and stick them into the mission system in California. Terrible idea, but we did it because we hadn't learned that lesson yet. And I don't think we've learned it yet today. So that's layer number 2. How do you allow your relationship to your own spiritual tradition, maybe Christianity, to be free enough to exist within the context in which you live? And that's the real goal. I think that's the real goal. And that can provide some way forward. All right. So finally, in closing, what might that look like for you? I think one of the ways to try to wrestle with that is to think about Christianity. And we've been given this opportunity kind of during the pandemic, right? Because we've all had to realize, how do I work my Christian faith when I don't go to church every Sunday, in the physical institution? How do I do that? And in many ways, we're learning, even in this pandemic, that one of the ways to do that is to hang on to those values, the wisdom, the insight from your tradition, but allowing it to operate inside of your kind of daily experience of life, right? It's not like during the pandemic, all of you decided that you would take one of the rooms of your house and you'd build, pews and an altar and a narthex and set up communion and replicate, the religious practices in your house. That's not how you did it. But you are thinking, how do I live the dynamics of my faith in this particular context? Right? How do I reach out in compassion for my neighbor? How do I hold a community in my heart and soul or my prayer life as they reel from the loss of their loved ones, both in our nation and around the planet? I mean, all of those things you're trying to allow to be in this sort of living conversation with your lived experience. And I guess that's where I would encourage you to explore your own Christian faith or your spiritual practices, is to, in a sense, allow them to be a wisdom partner within your lived experience, inside of the context in which we find ourselves at this moment in time. And that allows you in some ways to kind of loosen sort of the grip of some of the language and the images that were birthed in a different context over your life situation. Let me give you a little example, and then we'll call it a day here. I think one of the beauties within the Christian tradition is this idea that we talked about today, that all are invited to experience God's grace, right? All are welcome. Gather in the human family into the gift of life. That's an awesome piece within the Christian tradition that I think can transcend context. And that piece I've always held on to as I was growing up. And the first wave of that piece was that, hey, anybody who wants to come to church can be a part of the church community, right? So when I was younger, I used to think, everybody's a part of this church community. And that framework allowed me to see that, right? But then as I grew older and began to realize, there's other religious traditions, there's other ways of understanding God and worshiping God and being a part of a spiritual tradition, I allowed that wisdom to inform the way in which I honored other traditions. I say, yeah, we're all the human family is a part of the experience of the sacred. It seeks that experience of the sacred. They're all part of my family. Hindu, Jew, Buddhist, Muslim. We're all trying to find our way into that. I'm gonna embrace a broader sense of the human family, born out of that value that I discovered within my own Christian tradition. The same was true as our congregation moved through the RIC process. When we thought about what does it mean to be a spiritual person and to have manifesting in so many different people a more diverse array of understanding of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. And again, the spirit of that was allowed to find its way into that context, and I was able to slowly move myself and my soul into a more open embrace of all our sisters and brothers, no matter their sexual orientation, including my sexual orientation, or no matter their gender identity, no matter how I identify in my own gender identity. Oh, what freedom that was, right? And finally, I would say the new iteration of that for me, and I don't know, you have your own thing, but for me, it would be my sense of the natural world. That I also see that God holds that oak tree outside of my window with as much love, if I want to frame it this way, with as much love as God holds my grandchildren or me or my spouse or my family or my neighbors or my spiritual community or all the religions or people, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity or their racial background profile. It doesn't matter, right? Those trees and those birds and that plant are held there too. So hopefully you're seeing that gives a living, expansive capacity to your spiritual trajectory. And I can live in relationship to all that diversity, this is now metaphor, including the tree, with grace and acceptance and love and communion. And I don't have to live out of fear, right? That I've got to silo myself in one kind of way of thinking about world that's birthed in a religious tradition that was grounded in a context that is thousands of years old and is completely different than the one I'm in. That to me is a prison cell. And if I'm stuck in that prison cell, I'm gonna, I could potentially turn violent, right? I'm gonna get all wrapped up in my little silo and try to protect it like the Dickens if it's the only silo I know. But I think that has happened to a lot of people in our society. You and I, if you choose to take this other path, need to be the ones who continue to find ways to give expression to our faith inside of the dynamics of our context. And that, to me, is a living faith. Now, I know that's just my perspective, but to me, that allows us this capacity to move beyond what was the manifestation of the Christian tradition in such a horrific way last Wednesday. How can we, as a people, move beyond that? So let's close again with the words of "Gather us in" as we finish up our time together, and maybe spend some time reflecting on this for yourself, or maybe even join us at 4:00 today as we just kind of open up in a Zoom call just to hear what you think about this. What pieces of your own Christian tradition have the kind of dynamism that they can function beautifully within the changing context in which we find ourselves? Are there pieces of our tradition, our shared tradition, and the way you're connected to it, that allow you that kind of like capacity for fluidity in the experience of life that we're shared? So gather us in, shall you? Gather us in, O Spirit of life, with these words. Here in this place, maybe a new light is streaming. Maybe now the darkness. It vanishes away. See in this kind of space our fears and our dreamings brought here to you in the light of this day. So gather us in, the lost and forsaken. Gather us in, the blind and the lame. Gather us in, the rich and the haughty. Gather us in, the proud and the strong. Gather us in, not inside the buildings that are confining, not in some heavenly home light years away, but here in this experience of life, in this place, that new light is shining. Now is the kingdom. Now is the day. So gather us in and hold us forever. Gather us in and make us all your own. Gather us in, all people together. Fire of love now in our flesh, in our bones. All right. Amen to that. Whew. Thanks for hanging out for this. I know there's a bit, it felt a little bit wonkish, but I'm trying to figure this out myself. So you're gonna have to go on that journey with me, whether you like it or not. All right, just a couple of announcements before we send you off into the day. Obviously, listen to the music, gather us in, that Martin plays today. But if you want, I would go online and look at the lyrics, so you can kind of hear the lyrics as the song is played. It's beautiful, beautiful piece. Also today, it's 4 o'clock. We do our Sunday breakout. It's our second version of that. Chance for you to get into small groups with other people, have a conversation about some of the subject matter today, and to meet new people in our community. I will post the Zoom link to that at the top of the Facebook feed. You can also find it in the This Week e-blast that went out. Or if you really are struggling, email me, dan@oslc.net, and I'll send you the link. And I can build a kind of an email chain to make sure that you're all logged on to that today at 4 o'clock. Also, very excited, our senior high youth are putting together a painting event that everybody's invited to do and have a fun kind of painting experience together for all ages, kids, adults, seniors, teens. That's coming up early February. So February 6th, circle that. Look for more information on that. The Zoom link is already available in This Week at OSLC that comes to you in your inbox. Also, delighted to remind you to continue to journey and visit Soul Forum, our podcast. We're in this series on the glory of the goddess within the Hindu tradition. And some real, I think, soul-opening concepts in that podcast series this time. Even pushing some of my ideas of how does spirit manifest in the world from the tradition, the goddess tradition in Hinduism. Amazing stuff. So listen to that. Also, Martin is starting a new Bible study called Women in the Old Testament. So that's cranking up pretty soon. If you want to be a part of that, check that out as well. And then finally, on the 31st of this month, we celebrate our Pride Sunday, the Sunday that we celebrate being an RIC congregation. Got a wonderful interview lined up for that. So I'm looking forward to the 31st. Join us for that as well. Okay, I think that's it for today. I'm off to do the drive-in service and to try to figure out how we move through the inauguration this week and continue to invest the living energy of our spiritual tradition in the creation of a more and more and more robust democracy, which in my way of thinking is, if you will, a secular manifestation of what literally the early Jesus movement longed for. Is how does everybody have voice and place inside the fabric of the whole? How do they have that? Well, that's one piece of the puzzle. Let's try to live into that together collectively, informed by the spirit of our connection to the wisdom that they struggled with in a different context. Let's bring that wisdom into our own. All right. Peace out. See ya.